The sun hung like a merciless copper coin in the Texas sky, its heat waves dancing off the cracked earth like ghostly serpents. Jake Dusty Morrison wiped the sweat from his weathered brow as his horse Belle picked her way carefully through the mesquite and prickly pear. He'd been riding fence for 3 days straight, checking the boundaries of the Circle K ranch where he'd worked for the better part of 15 years. It was the buzzards that caught his attention first, 3 of them circling lazily about a mile ahead. In this godforsaken stretch of desert, buzzards usually meant one thing: death. Jake spurred Belle forward, his hand instinctively checking the Colt .45 at his hip. You never knew what you might find out here. What he found wasn't what he expected. Huddled beneath a scraggly mesquite tree, barely alive and no bigger than a tumbleweed, was a boy. Couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, his clothes torn to rags, lips cracked and bleeding from thirst. The kid's dark hair was matted with dust, and his olive skin was burned raw by the unforgiving sun. Well, I'll be damned, Jake muttered, dismounting quickly. He knelt beside the boy, checking for a pulse. Weak but steady. Hey there, little partner. Can you hear me? The boy's eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of desert sage, green with flecks of gold. He tried to speak, but only a raspy whisper emerged. Agua. Por favor. Jake didn't speak much Spanish, but he knew desperation when he heard it. He reached for his canteen, supporting the boy's head as he gave him small sips of water. Easy now, son. Not too much at once, or you'll make yourself sick. As the boy drank, Jake looked around for any sign of how he'd ended up here. No wagon tracks, no horse prints, nothing. It was as if the desert had simply coughed him up like a piece of unwanted gristle. What's your name, boy? Jake asked gently. Miguel, the child whispered, his voice gaining strength. Miguel Esperanza. Well, Miguel Esperanza, looks like you've had yourself quite an adventure. Where's your family? The boy's eyes filled with tears and he shook his head. Bandidos. They took everything. Mama and Papa? He couldn't finish the sentence. Jake felt his chest tighten. He'd seen enough violence in his 43 years to know the look of a child who'd witnessed unspeakable things. I'm sorry, son. Real sorry. He helped Miguel sit up against the tree trunk, giving him more water and a piece of jerky from his saddlebags. The boy ate like he hadn't seen food in days, which he probably hadn't. Tell you what, Miguel, Jake said, settling back on his heels. How'd you like to come work for me? I could use a partner, and you look like you might have some cowboy in you. Miguel's eyes widened. You want me? Course I do. Every good cowboy needs a sidekick, and I've been riding alone too long. Gets mighty lonely out here talking to Belle all the time. He gestured toward his horse, who snorted as if offended. See? She's getting tired of my conversation. Despite everything, Miguel managed a small smile. It was the first time Jake had seen the boy's face light up, and something stirred in his chest. A protective instinct he hadn't felt since his own son had died of fever 10 years ago. But I don't know how to be a cowboy, Miguel said. Well, that's what learning's for, isn't it? Besides, I wasn't born knowing how to rope a steer or break a bronco. My old partner taught me everything I know. Jake stood up, extending his hand. What do you say, partner? Ready to see what this cowboy life is all about? Miguel took his hand and Jake pulled him to his feet. The boy was unsteady but determined. See, yes, I want to learn. That's the spirit. Jake helped Miguel up onto Belle's back, then swung up behind him. First lesson, a cowboy always takes care of his own. And you're mine now, Miguel Esperanza. That's a promise. As they rode toward the Circle K ranch, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that finding this boy wasn't just coincidence. In a land where death lurked behind every rock and hope was as scarce as water, maybe they'd both found something worth holding on to. The desert had given him a son, and he'd be damned if he'd let anything happen to him. 5 years had passed since that scorching day in the desert, and Miguel Esperanza had grown into something Jake Morrison had never quite expected. At 14, the boy stood nearly as tall as Jake's shoulder, his frame lean but strong from years of ranch work. More importantly, he'd developed a mind sharp as a Bowie knife and twice as dangerous when it came to numbers and business. Jake, you're getting swindled again, Miguel said, looking up from the ledger book spread across the kitchen table of their small cabin. His English had improved dramatically, though he still carried the musical accent of his heritage. That cattle buyer from San Antonio is offering 30% below market price. Jake paused in cleaning his rifle, a bemused smile crossing his weathered face. Is that so, Professor? And how exactly do you know what market price is? I've been reading the newspapers from Austin and Dallas. Plus, I talked to the telegraph operator in town. Beef prices are up because of the railroad expansion. Miguel's sage green eyes sparkled with intelligence. We should hold our cattle until next month, then drive them to the railhead ourselves. Well, I'll be hornswoggled, Jake chuckled. 5 years ago, I found a half-dead kid in the desert. Now I've got myself a business partner. Their conversation was interrupted by the thunder of hoofbeats outside. Jake's hand instinctively moved to his gun as he peered through the window. A lone rider was approaching fast, and in their part of Texas, that usually meant trouble. The rider turned out to be Tommy Fletcher, one of the younger hands from the main ranch house. His face was flushed with excitement and worry as he dismounted. "Jake, Miguel, you need to come quick. There's been an accident at the ranch." They saddled up immediately, Miguel handling his horse, Esperanza, a spirited paint mare Jake had given him for his 13th birthday, with the skill of a born horseman. As they rode toward the main ranch, Tommy filled them in. "It's Miss Catherine," he said, referring to the ranch owner's daughter. "Her horse spooked during a storm last night. She's been thrown, and Doc says she might not walk again." Jake felt Miguel tense beside him. The boy had harbored feelings for Catherine Kellerman since he'd first laid eyes on her 3 years ago, though he'd never spoken of it directly. Catherine, now 19 and beautiful as a desert sunrise, had always treated Miguel with kindness, despite the difference in their stations. They found the ranch house in chaos. Catherine lay in her bed, pale as moonlight, her usually vibrant blue eyes dulled with pain and laudanum. Her father, Big Jim Kellerman, paced the room like a caged bear. "Damn horse," Big Jim muttered. "Should have shot that devil years ago." "Mr. Kellerman," Miguel said quietly, stepping forward. "May I see her?" Big Jim's eyes narrowed. Despite Jake's reputation as one of the best cowboys in Texas, some folks still saw Miguel as nothing more than a Mexican orphan Jake had taken pity on. "Boy, this ain't the time for—" "Let him through, Jim," Jake interrupted, his voice carrying an edge of steel. "Miguel's got a way with hurt things." Miguel approached Catherine's bedside, his hat in his hands. "Miss Catherine?" "It's Miguel." Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face. "Miguel," she whispered, managing a weak smile. "You came." "Of course I came." He knelt beside the bed, taking her hand gently. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a whole herd of longhorns," she said, attempting humor despite her pain. "Doc says I might never dance again." "Doctors don't know everything," Miguel said firmly. "My grandmother used to say that the body heals when the spirit is strong. And you, Miss Catherine, have the strongest spirit I know." Over the following weeks, Miguel spent every spare moment at Catherine's bedside. He read to her from books of poetry and adventure, told her stories of his childhood in Mexico, and slowly, carefully, helped her with exercises the doctor had prescribed. Jake watched with a mixture of pride and concern as his adopted son poured his heart into Catherine's recovery. "You're playing with fire, boy," Jake warned one evening as they rode home. "Big Jim's not going to take kindly to you courting his daughter." "I'm not courting her," Miguel protested, though his cheeks reddened. "I'm just helping a friend. Son, I may be old, but I ain't blind. You look at that girl like she hung the moon in stars." Miguel was quiet for a long moment. "She's too good for me, Jake, I know that. But I can't just stand by and watch her suffer." "Miguel," Jake said seriously, "you listen to me. You're worth 10 of any man in this county, and don't let anyone tell you different. But love's a dangerous game, especially when there's money and land involved." As if summoned by their conversation, a group of riders appeared on the horizon, heading toward the ranch house. Even in the fading light, Jake could make out the distinctive figure of Bartholomew Crenshaw, the wealthiest landowner in 3 counties and a man with a reputation for getting what he wanted, regardless of the cost. "Looks like Big Jim's got company," Jake observed. "The kind of company that usually means trouble," Miguel added grimly. They were both right. By morning, word had spread throughout the county. Bartholomew Crenshaw had made an offer to buy the Circle K ranch, and he wasn't the type of man who took no for an answer. The town of Esperanza Flats, named ironically for hope in a place where hope often died young, buzzed with tension as thick as summer humidity. Word of Crenshaw's interest in the Circle K had spread faster than wildfire, and everyone knew that when Bartholomew Crenshaw wanted something, he usually got it one way or another. Jake and Miguel sat at their usual table in Murphy's saloon. nursing beers and listening to the worried chatter of the other patrons. The saloon was a rough-hewn place that smelled of sawdust, tobacco, and broken dreams, but it was also where a man could hear the truth about what was happening in the county. "I heard Crenshaw's offering Big Jim twice what the ranch is worth," said Pete Murphy, the barrel-chested Irish saloon keeper, as he wiped down glasses with a rag that had seen better days. "Course, he's also making it clear that refusing might be unhealthy." Miguel's jaw tightened. At 19, he'd grown into a formidable young man, his shoulders broad from years of ranch work, his hands quick and sure. But it was his mind that had truly developed into something remarkable. "There has to be something we can do, Jake." "Son, Crenshaw owns half the county and has the other half in his pocket. He's got money, men, and connections all the way to Austin. What exactly do you think two cowboys can do against that?" Before Miguel could answer, the saloon doors swung open with enough force to rattle the windows. Catherine Kellerman walked in, her chin held high despite the shocked murmurs that followed her entrance. Ladies of her station didn't frequent establishments like Murphy's, but Catherine had never been one to follow conventional rules. She'd recovered from her accident, though she still walked with a slight limp that somehow only added to her determined grace. Her golden hair was pinned up beneath a simple hat, and her blue dress, while modest, couldn't hide the fact that she'd grown into a woman of striking beauty. "Miguel," she said, ignoring the stares of the other patrons, "I need to speak with you." Jake stood up, tipping his hat. "Miss Catherine, you're looking well." "Thank you, Jake." She turned to Miguel, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "Father's agreed to sell to Crenshaw. The papers will be signed tomorrow." Miguel felt like he'd been kicked by a mule. "Catherine, I'm sorry. I know how much the ranch means to you." "It's not just the ranch," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Crenshaw's made it clear that I'm part of the deal. He wants to marry me." The beer mug in Miguel's hand cracked under the pressure of his grip. Jake placed a warning hand on his shoulder, but Miguel was already standing, his face dark with fury. "Over my dead body," he said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the suddenly silent saloon. Catherine's eyes widened. "Miguel, you can't what? Can't protect the woman I love?" The words were out before he could stop them, hanging in the air like smoke from a gunshot. The silence stretched until Pete Murphy cleared his throat. "Well, I'll be damned. Boy's got sand, I'll give him that." Catherine's face flushed pink, but she didn't look away from Miguel's intense gaze. "You love me?" "Have since the day I met you," Miguel said simply. "Figured you knew." "I hoped," she whispered, "but I never dared believe." Their moment was shattered by the sound of spurs on the wooden floor. Bartholomew Crenshaw himself had entered the saloon, flanked by 4 of his men. He was a tall, imposing figure in his 50s, with silver hair and cold gray eyes that missed nothing. His expensive suit looked out of place in the rough saloon, but he wore it like armor. "Miss Kellerman," Crenshaw said smoothly, removing his hat. "I wasn't expecting to find you in such colorful surroundings." "Mr. Crenshaw," Catherine replied coolly. "I was just leaving. Actually, I think you should stay. We have business to discuss." His eyes shifted to Miguel, and his smile turned predatory. "And you must be the Mexican boy I've heard so much about." "Miguel, isn't it?" "That's right," Miguel said, not backing down despite the obvious threat in Crenshaw's voice. "I understand you've been filling Miss Kellerman's head with romantic nonsense. That stops now." Miguel stepped forward, and Jake tensed, ready to back his boy's play. "The only thing that stops now is you thinking you can buy people like cattle." Crenshaw laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Boy, you have no idea who you're dealing with. I own this town, these people, and soon I'll own that ranch and everything on it." His eyes moved to Catherine with obvious hunger. "Everything. Not everything," Miguel said quietly. "Some things can't be bought. Everything has a price, boy. The question is whether you're smart enough to take what's offered before I decide to simply take what I want." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every man present knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come, assuming anyone lived to tell the tale. "Miguel," Catherine said urgently, "please, don't do this. Crenshaw will destroy you." "Maybe," Miguel said, never taking his eyes off Crenshaw. But some things are worth fighting for, even if you can't win. Crenshaw's smile faded. You're making a mistake, boy. A fatal one. The only mistake, Miguel said, his hand moving closer to his gun, would be letting you walk out of here thinking you've already won. The saloon held its collective breath, waiting to see who would blink first. 25 years later. The train whistle echoed across the Texas plains like a lonesome cry, announcing the arrival of the 315 from Dallas to Esperanza Flats. The town had grown considerably since that fateful day in Murphy's saloon, with electric lights now illuminating the main street and automobiles sharing the roads with horses and wagons. Progress had come to this corner of Texas, but some things remained unchanged. The dust, the heat, and the long memories of its people. Jake Morrison, now 68, and moving with the careful gait of a man whose bones remembered every fall from every horse, stood on the platform watching the passengers disembark. His hair had gone completely white, and deep lines mapped the geography of his weathered face, but his eyes were still sharp as a hawk's. He wasn't sure why he'd come to meet this particular train. The telegram had been brief. Arriving Tuesday. Time to come home, M.E. But something in those simple words had stirred memories he'd tried to bury for 2 decades. The last passenger to step down from the first-class car was a man in an expensive suit, his dark hair now touched with silver at the temples. He moved with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command, but when his sage-green eyes met Jake's across the platform, the years seemed to fall away like autumn leaves. "Hello, Jake," Miguel Esperanza said, his voice deeper now but still carrying that musical accent that had charmed everyone from cattle buyers to senators. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake breathed, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Miguel Esperanza, or should I say, Mr. Miguel Esperanza, railroad tycoon and cattle baron extraordinaire." Miguel laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Just Miguel will do fine. You look good, old man." "You're a terrible liar, but I appreciate the sentiment." Jake clasped Miguel's hand, then pulled him into a fierce embrace. "Lord, boy, it's good to see you." As they walked toward Jake's wagon, he'd stubbornly refused to buy one of those newfangled automobiles. Miguel looked around the town with eyes that missed nothing. "It's changed. Everything changes, son. Question is whether it changes for the better." Jake helped load Miguel's luggage, noting the quality of the leather and the expensive brass fittings. "I heard about your success up in Chicago. Railroad empire, they say. Cattle ranches from here to Montana." "I've been fortunate," Miguel said modestly. "Fortunate, hell. You always were the smartest person in any room. I just never figured you'd use those brains to become richer than Croesus." As they drove through town, Miguel noticed the changes with a businessman's eye. New buildings, paved streets, and prosperity evident everywhere. But he also noticed something else. The name on many of the businesses and buildings. "Crenshaw Industries," he read aloud from a large sign. "Crenshaw Bank, Crenshaw General Store. I see our old friend has done well for himself." Jake's expression darkened. "Bartholomew's been dead for 10 years now. His son Richard runs things now. Apple didn't fall far from the tree, if you catch my meaning." "And Catherine?" Miguel asked quietly. Jake was silent for a long moment. "She married Crenshaw, like her father wanted. Had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Been a widow for 5 years now." Miguel absorbed this information without visible emotion, but Jake knew him well enough to see the pain in his eyes. "I heard about her father's death. I sent flowers. She got them, asked me if I thought they were from you." "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that I didn't know, but I hoped they were." They rode in comfortable silence until they reached the old Circle K ranch, or what had been the Circle K. The main house was gone, replaced by a sprawling mansion that looked like it belonged in Dallas rather than the Texas countryside. The working ranch had been converted into something resembling a gentleman's estate, complete with manicured gardens and white painted fences. "She still lives there?" Miguel asked. "In the guest house. Richard let her stay after his father died, though I suspect it's more about keeping an eye on her than kindness." Miguel nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "Jake, I need to tell you why I'm really here. I figured it wasn't just for a social visit. I've been buying land, quietly, through various companies and intermediaries. Over the past 5 years, I've acquired most of the county, everything except the Crenshaw holdings. Jake's eyes widened. Son of a gun. You're planning to take him on. I'm planning to finish what we started 25 years ago. Miguel's voice carried the steel of a man who'd learned to fight in boardrooms and courtrooms as well as saloons. Richard Crenshaw has been bleeding this county dry, just like his father did. Overcharging for everything, underpaying his workers, driving small ranchers out of business. And you think you can stop him? Miguel smiled, and for a moment, Jake saw the determined boy he'd found in the desert all those years ago. I don't think, Jake, I know. Because tomorrow morning, Richard Crenshaw is going to discover that he doesn't own this county anymore. I do. As if summoned by their conversation, a carriage appeared on the road leading from the mansion. Even at a distance, Jake could see the familiar figure of Catherine Kellerman, now Catherine Crenshaw, driving the small buggy herself. She'd aged gracefully, her golden hair now touched with silver, but her posture still proud and straight. When she saw Miguel, she pulled the carriage to a stop, her blue eyes wide with shock and something else. Hope, perhaps, or fear. "Miguel?" she whispered, as if afraid he might disappear like a desert mirage. "Hello, Catherine," he said, removing his hat. "You look beautiful." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she climbed down from the carriage. I hoped, but I never believed you'd really come back. I promised I would, didn't I? That was a long time ago. We were different people then. Were we? Miguel stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her face. Because standing here now, I feel exactly the same as I did that day in Murphy's saloon. Catherine laughed through her tears. You mean angry and ready to fight the world? I mean in love with you. The words hung in the desert air like a prayer, and for a moment, the years fell away completely. They were young again, full of dreams and defiance, ready to take on anyone who stood in their way. Miguel, Catherine said softly, there's something you need to know, about my children. But before she could finish, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Richard Crenshaw rode up with a group of his men, his face dark with suspicion and anger. Well, well, Richard said, dismounting with theatrical flair. The prodigal son returns. I heard rumors that Miguel Esperanza had made something of himself up north, but I never believed them. Believe them, Miguel said calmly. Catherine, get away from him, Richard ordered. This man is dangerous. The only dangerous thing here, Miguel replied, is a man who thinks he owns people. Richard's hand moved toward his gun, but Miguel didn't flinch. I wouldn't if I were you. You see, Richard, times have changed. This isn't the Old West anymore, where problems are solved with bullets. These days they're solved with lawyers and banknotes. What's that supposed to mean? Miguel reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. It means that, as of this morning, I own the mineral rights to every piece of land in this county. It means I own the railroad spur that brings supplies to your businesses. It means I own the water rights to the river that feeds your cattle. He smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd learned to be patient, to plan, and to strike when his enemy was most vulnerable. In short, Richard, it means I own you. Richard's face went white. That's impossible. Is it? You might want to check with your bank. Oh, wait, I own that too, as of yesterday. The desert wind picked up, stirring the dust around their feet like the ghosts of old dreams finally coming to life. Miguel looked at Catherine, then at Jake, and finally at the land that had shaped him, broken him, and ultimately made him into the man he'd become. You see, Richard, Miguel continued, 25 years ago, you and your father made a mistake. You thought you could take everything that mattered to me, but you forgot something important. You forgot that the boy you tried to destroy was raised by the best man in Texas. He nodded toward Jake. And he taught me that sometimes the best revenge is simply outliving your enemies and becoming everything they never thought you could be. Catherine stepped forward, her eyes shining with pride and love. Miguel, what are you going to do? I'm going to give this county back to the people who belong here. I'm going to make sure that no one ever again has to choose between their dignity and their survival. He looked directly at Richard. "And I'm going to marry the woman I should have married 25 years ago, if she'll have me." Catherine's answer was to throw her arms around his neck and kiss him with all the passion of 2 decades of separation and longing. Jake wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and grinned. "Well, I'll be damned. Looks like that half-dead kid I found in the desert turned out all right after all." As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Miguel Esperanza held the woman he loved and looked out over the land that had given him everything, including the strength to leave it behind and the wisdom to come home again. The desert had made him an orphan, but it had also given him a father, a purpose, and a love that had survived everything the world could throw at it. Some stories, he reflected, were worth waiting a lifetime to finish. And this one was just beginning.